Hello.
Wow.
Good evening.
I feel like I've been riding a roller coaster.
That's exactly right. Hi, good evening. Welcome to session 4 of Bang Bang Con 2021. Session 4, did I get that right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It's 4. All 4.
So I'm super excited. So I don't know, like last night we had an excellent Bang Bang Con. Actually, I've really been liking this pattern of a mini Bang Bang Con every single night. It's like giving me something to look forward to, and I'm going to be looking forward to this all week now.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it's really easy to like throw a bunch of Bang Bang Con over a weekend, but it's just like sort of nice to have it like across the whole week too.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's amazing about it is like I've been watching all of the comments scroll by in Discord. I cannot do that today, of course, since otherwise my brain may explode. But I've been watching all of the comments scroll by in Discord, and it really feels like Bang Bang Con. Like, I helped to organize Bang Bang Con West 2019 and 2020, and we dodged a bullet in 2020, right? Like 2020, like the world disintegrated approximately a week after Bang Bang Con 2020, and so like that was my last moment of like Bang Bang Con-ness. And so last year Bang Bang Con felt like Bang Bang Con Online felt like Bang Bang Con, and this year Bang Bang Con Online really feels like Bang Bang Con to me. And all of the talks last night I really enjoyed, just out of the sheer eclectic base of Bang Bang Con-ness. I think that's kind of what I don't know, that's what I really love. And so I'm really excited for tonight's upcoming talks also.
Tonight
really
looks like it also has a very interesting collection of talks. As I was putting together like the bios from everybody, pulling them all together, I'm just like looking forward to tonight as well.
Yeah. I think so. Last night we started with some all-purpose banter for a couple of minutes for technical reasons, and it turns out that was actually a very good idea, because it meant that because like I'm never on time to anything, and I assume, and so I just project this out into the world, that I assume that nobody else is ever on time to anything, and so I assume that our dear audience may still be getting settled in at their keyboards with popcorn, as the emojis seem to go in Discord. So I think we should like do this for another couple of minutes or something.
Yeah. Well, we could also do wonderful things like thank our sponsors who have helped pay for all the wonderful things you see. Even though we're virtual, we're not like a physical space. We still have a lot of expenses that go on with the course of running a conference. So
that's the case.
Providing money really helps us be able to not just put on a conference, but put on a really good conference with captioning, with being able to pay speakers, lots of wonderful things like that.
Great. Our sponsors this year are, I'm going to put Cindy on the spot and see if she has the slide ready. Oh yeah, very look good. At that. Our sponsor. So this year we're sponsored by Xander. We are sponsored by Daily. Those are both excellent sponsors, and we really, really appreciate their sponsorship. And so, you know, we appreciate the sponsorship of all of our sponsors, but we especially appreciate our excellent sponsors. Our awesome sponsors this year are Wherewithal, and they are also sponsoring our famous live captioning, which is done by a real human being, not an AI-generated caption. There is a real human being captioning everything and typing very quickly into a very fancy keyboard called a steno keyboard. Tonight, our captioner is Mirabai Knight, who is captioning all of this, and that's available on our live stream and in the YouTube captions tomorrow morning. So Wherewithal is the sponsor for that. Discourse is an awesome sponsor this year. Full Story is an awesome sponsor this year. 2 Sigma is an awesome sponsor this year. Phasero is an awesome sponsor this year. Mapbox is an awesome sponsor this year, and so is Accelerated Tech. Thank you so much to all of our amazing sponsors this year.
Yeah, and also the sponsors help us get really good AV people like Cindy, who's really on top of putting slides for sponsors up on screen.
Right. Cindy has been helping us run in this whole StreamYard environment and has been taking care of this so that like I only have to focus on talking and that sort of thing, and which is approximately as much as my brain can handle.
Yeah, there's a lot of AV wrangling with different people. Some are live, some are pre-recorded, screen sharing. And then when we're done, taking all that and putting it on YouTube so it premieres at the exact right time for the people on the sync watches. So there's a lot going on. She's absolutely wonderful at taking care of all this behind the scenes.
Yes. All right. I think I've run my mouth long enough. Shall we introduce our first speaker?
One more thing. Don't forget, you can tweet out all the things going on. We absolutely love people that live tweet. It shares the joy with the internet. Be sure to use virtual BangBangCon for the hashtag, or mention at BangBangCon, because that's really us and not the BTS group.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Apparently, the most popular thing we've ever done has not be BTS. And apparently in the BTS sphere, we've had like hundreds of mentions overnight as like a very popular BTS account like what expressed their joy at our naming collision. I think it's hilarious. I just love it. It
amuses me. One of them, even like I was kind of glancing through replies at just the people that were absolutely humored at the like, oh my gosh, really? Like they're going along with it. And somebody's like, I hope their conference is going well. And I actually replied like, it's going absolutely wonderful. And just got a whole bunch of likes on top of that. So it's been fun and amusing to work through, I guess, look through all the tweets and everything.
Yeah, I love it. Okay. All right. Let us get started. So up first, okay, I have it. I have it in a window here. Excellent. Tropes, cliches, made-up slangs. It's the Data Sitters Club. Quinn Dombrowski will be presenting this. Quinn loves languages, digital humanities, and sewing brightly colored clothes, and can often be found on Twitter at Quinnania. Yes, I think I got that correct. All right.
I get it.
Quinn works in the library in the Division of Literatures, Cultures, and Languages at Stanford University. That's right up the street from me. But lives in Berkeley, that is not right up the street from me, with a husband, 3 small kids, and 2 geriatric cats. I'm very excited about this. I did not ever pick up a Babysitter's Club book in the 90s, but I'm excited anyway to understand more and more and more. Please tell me all about this, Quinn Dombrowski.
Hi. If you ever experienced or were adjacent to 80s and 90s girlhood in the US, you've probably heard of the Babysitter's Club. It's a series of books by Anna Martin and a team of ghostwriters about a group of teen and preteen girls who form a club that matches parents with a young babysitter committed to quality childcare. They also solve mysteries and go on improbable vacations and things like that. The series is such a cultural touchstone with ongoing impact, like new graphic novel adaptations, a hit Netflix series, a documentary on Asian American fashion icon character Claudia Kishi, and a book coming out this summer, We Are the Babysitters Club, with now adult readers reflecting on their relationship with the series. What you might be less familiar with is digital humanities, or DH, an uneasily defined academic subspecialty where people, among other things, apply computational methods to research questions in literature, history, and other fields. Humanities academia in general is very serious. There's really not a cultural equivalent to can it run Doom? Even the word serious is a compliment. There's not a lot of space for fun, and what's worse, copyright makes it impossible to publicly share text corpora of anything after 1924, which is to say anything that most normal people would have ever enjoyed outside of maybe high school English. Also, there's not a lot of university courses on learning how to do computational text analysis on literature. The people who get into it tend to have had some prior experience with computational sciences and CS. So you can probably see where this is going. DH doing computational text analysis has a lot of white guys working on very serious old literature. And many of them are awesome and put together tutorials and try to make the field welcoming, but the resources out there tend to be shaped by that perspective and background. So this is our story about how we set out to create an alternate path in for folks like ourselves who started off more comfortable with the Babysitter's Club made-up slang than scikit-learn. So, fall 2019, my husband and I left our 3 small children in the mostly capable hands of his parents and hopped on a plane to Las Vegas for a week. It was our first vacation in 4 years, and I promised I wouldn't do any work. Since my work is focused on doing DH for non-English literature, I thought to myself, what a great chance to try out working with English for a change. I came across an article about the Babysitters Club with an interview with my friend Shannon Supple, who curates the Anna Martin papers at Smith College, and I realized that's it. That's what I'll do this week. So soon I was enjoying a beer, amassing a corpus of these books, and tweeting about it, and discovered that more than a few of my digital humanist friends were in fact walking encyclopedias of the Babysitters Club. They were interested in exploring computational text analysis too, and so before long, the 6 of us formed the Datasitters Club. Lee Scallert-Bissett, Katja Bowers, Maria Sachiko-Sasiri, Anouk Lang, Rubika Rizum, and me. But I also can't forget Mark Algie Hewitt, the director of the Stanford Literary Lab, one of the most famous DH text analysis labs in the world. Just like Logan Bruno, he's our token guy data sitter, but he doesn't take the extra work off our hands. He's our expert bridge to what you can and can't do with computational text analysis. So we started writing these books where we take some DH method or topic and talk in detail about how we applied it to this corpus and why, all written in a very casual, colloquial way designed to be readable for someone with no technical background but an interest in these books. We also write with a lot of exclamation marks, an average of 30 per book. One of the things that we explored was what changes have been made in later editions. Did they actually run with the text from the 80s when they republished the books in the 2000s? We looked at a bunch of different tools, but the most usable was diff mash patch, which showed that there were some changes. Stacy's fluffy blonde perm became a fancy haircut, Janine no longer reached around to the back of the computer to turn it off, and happily, the word thong was replaced with flip-flop. We were ecstatic. We had found a thing. There were emails flying wildly until Maria, who's actually a professor of children's literature and childhood studies, worked up the courage to burst our bubble, pointing out that this happens all the time in children's literature. Seeing these changes might be fun, but it's not actually a new scholarly discovery. And Maria wrote about that in DSC number 3, The Truth About Digital Humanities Collaborations and Textual Variants. What I thought was going to be a guide to text comparison ended up being about something more important. Speaking up when your friends have gone off the rails with something that isn't what it seems. And that's become part of how we write all these books. We write our feelings, frustrations, doubts, and those things get equal space along with the code. We've also been collecting as many translations of the Babysitters Club as we can. The series appeared, at least in part, in around 20 languages in the 90s and 2000s, and the release of the Netflix series has spurred a new wave of translations in the last year. It's been really interesting to look at different translation strategies. By and large, these books are not getting adapted to the local context of their readers. They aren't treated as timeless stories of female friendship that just need some tweaking to be made more familiar for their audiences. Their allure, it seems, is typically as American stories about American girls engaging in American entrepreneurial capitalism in America. We stumbled into looking at the French translations in depth first, and it turned out to be a great choice. The series was translated 3 separate times into French. In Quebec, where they did change the locale, the girls live in a suburb of Montreal, and Stacy is from Toronto. In Belgium, where the stories were unusually extremely localized. The girls live in a Paris suburb, and Jessie, originally from the only Black family in Stony Brook, Connecticut, moved from Burkina Faso in the Belgian translation. And later in France, where everything is set in America, just like the original books. But even for books that aren't localized, some concessions often have to be made. The Babysitters Club is littered with American brand names, especially for food. SpaghettiOs, Gatorade, Twinkies. We started to wonder, what did the translators do with it all? So by compiling a list of food words in the text where we had multiple French translations, I wrote some code to run the English text through WordNet, a giant database that classifies English words into certain categories, including foods. That was a start, but it was good that I manually checked some things that were classified as not food, because it turns out that WordNet thinks that the primary meaning of hot dog is daredevil, and hot dog is not a food. Maybe it has a point. I used this data to train a name entity recognition model on food words using Spacy to make it easier to find food words in other texts. Once we identified all the English sentences with food words, we use an algorithm called Blue Align to line up the English text with the translations so that all the sentences that matched one another had the same line number. This made it easier to compare the text and see how different words got adapted. Lee and our Belgian data sitter Isabelle Gribamont took a look at the results and made some surprising discoveries. There were some creative adaptations, like turning SpaghettiOs into ossobuco, a complicated tomato sauce and veal dish. A lot of generalizations, like making M&Ms just chocolate, and at least one explanatory footnote for readers, which you might not have imagined that Gatorade would be the thing that necessitates a footnote in children's literature, but here we are. So in DSC number 6, Voyant's Big Day, Katja used the fun text exploration environment Voyant tools developed by the late Stefan Sinclair to tackle one of the most memorable quirks of the Babysitters Club. If you've read these books, you might remember that they're marginal or made-up slang, which has to be explained in every book where it occurs. Fresh means cool, and there's also dibble, which is short for incredible, which sometimes occurs as dibbly, so something could be referred to as dibbly fresh. We remembered this language being all over this series, but using some of Voyant's concordance functionality and lining up the books chronologically, there's only a small handful of books where it appeared, and it's most commonly associated with reader anti-favorite Mallory, whose claims that everyone in the club uses this language aren't actually supported. Maybe Mallory is just an unreliable narrator who keeps trying to make fetch happen. Another infamous feature of the Babysitters Club is its repeated use of tropes in Chapter 2, which, in every single book, reliably recaps the basics of who the characters are and what the deal is with the club. We wondered how similar are these Chapter 2s anyways. And if you look at other chapters compared across the books in this heat map based on cosine similarity using word frequencies where darker means more similarity, you can see that Chapter 2s in the big picture are indeed much more similar to one another than other chapters are. We also used some fuzzy text matching code created by Scott Enderle to find 6 grams shared by different Chapter 2s, trying to identify what makes a given pair of Chapter 2s more similar to each other. This gave us a network of the books with a high amount of repetition. We tried color coding the network by which character was the narrator, but that didn't give us a lot of explanatory power. But when we color coded it by ghostwriter, it became really clear that the writers mostly ripped off their own phrasing from other books they had written. So attending Bang Bang Con has been a delight and an inspiration. I don't often get to share what we're doing in the Data Sitters Club with people who so openly embrace joy, whimsy, and a sense of why not with their work. The thought occurs, maybe literature is something like a poorly documented API. It contains wonderful things that you can access with the help of computation, and maybe there's even scholarship that can point the way towards interesting things to explore, like notes from people who've tried to access the API before. What if you treated the books you've loved like data sets that you could explore and appreciate in new ways, even if there's no straightforward way in? If you find something cool or get hopelessly tangled in text, I'd love to hear about it and introduce you to a community of people grappling with the mysteries of literature. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Quinn, for that. I have to admit, I looked at the Data Setters Club last week, the website yesterday. I can't talk. Yesterday, I looked at the website. The website is a gem. It has like every Babysitters Club theme, all the pictures. They just roll with the whole thing. I love it. You all should go check that out. I don't even remember where the website I found it at, but it's probably posted in the channel. Go look at it. It's amusing.
Oh, I'm muted. There we go.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I love that. I love that because it feels like one of these like only at Bang Bang Con kinds of things. Like it's a fusion. I don't know. One of the things that I love about this is the fusion of like all these kinds of wildly eclectic ideas right on the edges of computation and using computational tools to surface insights, I guess, in places that you wouldn't otherwise go looking, right? And so the thing that I love about the phrase that I kept that like my mind has stuck to is literature is a poorly documented API, and the question of how to use this API and how to harness like the power of literature by asking questions about it as a big data set, as a large data set. Of how similar are these various pieces? I don't know. My brain is still churning on thinking about like when I took classical lit back in high school, right? And I'm thinking about like all of the literary techniques of like how do you get a bard to remember, how do you get a bard to remember each piece of the story of Odysseus in sequence? And so I'm like churning on this of like coming back to these analyses that I vaguely remember, and the approach of using like modern computational tool. I don't know. I'm so excited by this.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me. There's been other talks, like somebody dissected the gray brick Game Boy and how the cartridges work to make his own version of it for a band that was releasing an album. I don't know. I love that Bing Bang Con is a cool place to kind of bring older vintage, whatever, retro things back and just kind of investigate them a little deeper.
Yes. And continuing in the apparent theme of Bang Bang Con 2021, started off with a Doom reference. I like how we have an emergent theme going somehow. Anyway, I think we are all set to begin with our next speaker. Our next speaker is Nicholas Carlini, who is going to be talking to us about Golem, the Game of Life Limited Unlimited Register Machine. Nicholas is by day employed as a research scientist at a large search engine company in the hopes that he will provide new and useful research. He also does this by night as well, but disregards the qualifier useful. I'm very excited about this because the Game of Life is it's a collection of algorithms that I find vaguely like not all that useful and very exciting anyway. And if you haven't looked up the algorithm hash life, so for those of you who don't know what the Game of Life is, it's a cellular automata. I'm sure Nicholas will be telling you all about this in a moment. But there are reasons to simulate very, very large grids, like what Nicholas is about to tell you. And there is a really, really cool algorithm called hash life that I've always wanted to give a talk on. And this is exploring one of my favorite things from a different perspective. Anyway, please welcome Nicholas Carlini.
Thanks. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the Game of Life Limited Unlimited Register Machine. This is something that I've been working on for a while that I'm really excited to talk about. So maybe to get started with a little bit of a weird question. What is a computer? And this is a little bit weird because there's lots of different definitions of computers. And for this talk, I'm going to exclusively think about computers just as a collection of digital logic gates in some interesting configuration. This here's a schematic for an Intel 4004. It's one of the first microchips that was produced. And really all they are is just a collection of digital logic gates. And so, for example, we can have here just an AND gate. You all have probably seen this at some point in the past. All an AND gate is just a function that takes two inputs and returns one output. If neither of the inputs, or if both of the inputs are 1, then the output is 1. Otherwise, the output is 0. So only in the configuration 1, 1 do you get output 1. There are lots of other logic gates, but maybe one that's interesting to consider for a moment is also the NOT gate. It goes from an input of 0 to an output of 1 and an input of 1 to an output of 0. So it just inverts the input. Okay. And really, like I promise, that is all there is to developing these complicated circuits. AND gates and NOT gates can do everything. Okay. Now, most computers today are built with something like, billions of transistors. Even there are some that are like bordering on trillions. But the smallest recognizable computer that uses as few transistors as possible, as few of these logic gates as possible, is probably the unlimited register machine. And the way this works is it's a computer with 3 instructions. You can increment a value stored at a register. You can decrement a value stored at a register. Or you can test if a register is equal to 0. And if it's not equal to 0, jump to a given address. There's the only 3 things you can do. But it turns out this is enough to perform arbitrary Turing-complete computation. Okay, hold on to that thought for a minute. We'll come back to that. This is Conway's Game of Life. Conway's Game of Life is a 2-dimensional cellular automata. It's this thing with the glider that moves across the screen if you've seen it before. And the way it works is very simple. You have a series of what are called generations. And at each generation, you have every cell is either alive or dead. A cell becomes alive if it has exactly 3 neighbors. This one has 3 neighbors, so this cell will become alive at the next generation. This one has 5, and so it will not become alive. On the other hand, a cell that is currently alive gets to stay alive if it has 2 or 3 neighbors. This one has 3 neighbors, so it gets to stay alive. So we should expect that the next generation, we will have the sequence alive, dead, alive for these 3 middle cells, and that's exactly what we get. And we're going to do this for every single cell in the entire thing, and we're going to go through as many generations as we want. Okay, so that's Conway's Game of Life. What can you do with it? Here's maybe one of the most famous configurations. This is called the glider gun. It creates these glider patterns going down and to the right relatively continuously for as long as you want. Okay, this seems pretty, interesting to see, but like, what's the purpose of this? Well, you can do not only that, but you can also make it go horizontally. This is called a spaceship. Instead of just going down to the right, you can make it go horizontally. You can make it go vertically if you rotate the spaceship the other way around. Okay, so where am I going with this? Well, let's consider what happens if we have a glider that runs into a spaceship. Normally, they just hit each other, and then they both go away. But if we have another spaceship coming in from the bottom, this spaceship hits the glider first, and then the other spaceship coming in from the left gets to continue on to the right. Okay. Wait a second. That sounds remarkably similar to an AND gate, where only if both patterns are present is the spaceship coming from the left allowed to go through to the right. And in fact, it is. So, I mean, can we do a NOT gate also? Okay, here's a NOT gate. There's no input on the left, and there's an output on the right. We send an input in from the left, and after a short propagation delay, we end up with this glider stream colliding with the output, and now there's no output on the right. And so we have, again, input on the left, no output on the right, which seems, very similar to exactly this sort of NOT configuration we want. And I said there was this sort of theorem that if you have enough AND and NOT gates, you can build anything you want. And in particular, you could build an unlimited register machine. And you have to limit it because, computers in reality aren't infinite size. But let's go with that. Okay, so what do you need for a computer? Well, I mean, if you ask some people, they'll tell you the first thing you need is a clock. A clock, if you're an electrical engineer, means you're going to oscillate some crystal at some high frequency. But we're in the game of life, so we don't need to worry about physics. We can just connect a NOT gate onto itself. And like all of the electrical engineers out there are going to be screaming, saying like, where is the power coming from? You can't just like, make a thing connect to itself. But like, this is a simulation in the game of life. We can do whatever we want. So here it is. This is a NOT gate connected onto itself. You have to rotate the stream accordingly because gliders don't bend. You can't just curve a trace. And what you end up with is this very nice pattern where it will cycle on and off and on and off essentially forever. Eventually, I'll have to move on to the next slide, but it will just do this as long as we ask it to. Okay, so there's a clock. Now we need memory, some way to store data for sort of a time to retrieve it later in the future. So here's our memory cell. By default, it doesn't do anything interesting. It's an OR gate and a NOT gate connected into each other. But if you have input that comes in from the upper left, then you set these gliders going in this loop. Even after the input is gone, the gliders are still looping here. And if you send something in from the bottom left, then it clears it out and makes this now have the empty state. And it stays empty. And it's just going to continue in this empty pattern until eventually, from the upper left, again, we're going to have this new glider stream come on in. And the glider stream will come from the upper left and reset this gate back in. And now we'll continue looping and have this 1 until eventually later we have another 0 coming in from the left, from the lower left. Okay, so there's our memory. Now we need some way to do arithmetic. And this is like the third piece of a computer. You need to be able to, at a regularly scheduled interval, store and load data. So here is our arithmetic function. What it's going to do is it's going to add 1. So we have 0 on the left, add to 1. You have 1 to 2. This is counting in binary. We're going 2 to 3. And this is just a very simple circuit construction that's going to add. 3 plus 1 is 4. So now we're going 4 plus 1 is 5. And this will just count up as long as we want. So this is a very simple arithmetic circuit, which for the unlimited register machine is all that we need. We need only to be able to increment. Decrement is also very simple once you have increment. Okay. Then it turns out, there are lots of other things that you have to build, but unfortunately, we don't have time for those in this talk. This is everything that we need for a computer. So here one is. This is the unlimited register machine implemented on the game of life. I'm going to pause here for a second because I think it's just nice to watch it. Okay, so the way that it works is in the upper left here, we have our clock. This is what counts, just a NOT gate connected to itself. At the top, we have 16 4-bit registers. Each register can be 4 bits. We then have an ALU over on the right. This is what does the increment or decrement. We have a program counter to keep track of where we are. A 7-segment display decoder to send some output to the right. We have the program ROM. This is the code that we actually implement. There's the instructions we're going to run on the bottom. And because I wanted to, we have a two-stage pipeline. So this computer can actually fetch and execute 2 instructions at the same time. This makes it twice as fast. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to write a program in order to factor the number 15. So why are we going to factor 15? Well, because I think that's just sort of a fun thing to do. This is the instructions you would need in order to do that. And so we run it. It would take actually quite some time to run. So let me just skip towards near the end, and let me just let it go. I've sped it up a little while using hash life and letting it run. And it tells me the answer is that 15 is equal to 3 times 5, which it is. And so if you look up, from the news, you find that like the best quantum computers from 2012 could almost always, maybe with 50% probability, calculate that 15 was equal to 3 times 5. And I've just introduced a computer here that's able to do exactly this same thing with 100% accuracy. So I'm not exactly saying that the game of life unlimited register machine is going to beat quantum computers at their own game in the next decade. But, I think the evidence is pretty compelling here. So thank you very much, and happy to take any questions later.
I am absolutely in awe of all of that.
That is fantastic. This is the future. Yeah. We are learning useful, important things at Bang Bang Con 2021.
Exactly. I have this Arduino kit. I feel like I should just throw it away because everything I've just seen is so much cooler than this.
I don't know. Digital logic is one of my favorite things. In fact, it is so much one of my favorite things that is what I do professionally. And so implementing digital logic on top of, I like weird machines, and I like implementing digital logic on top of weird machines. And so if you like this kind of thing, our keynote speaker is our closing keynote speaker, Kate Temkin, is also a digital logic expert. She is, I will talk about all of that later, I'm sure, or when it is time to introduce Kate Temkin. But on Saturday, if you like that, do be around for that. But yes, anyway, I don't know. I just hold such a soft spot in my heart for weird hacks on top of the game of life and digital logic configurations built on particularly weird things that I guess that's digital logic. Sure, good enough.
Yeah, and I think there's a whole Reddit full of people trying to build all sorts of things in Game of Life. Somebody posted in the Discord a link to, is it possible to build the game of Tetris in the Game of Life? And I haven't looked at it yet, but I'm absolutely not surprised that somebody has not only attempted, but actually completed doing this.
That is I think it was a Stack Overflow question, right? That somebody asked as a joke and it nearly got closed. Possibly. I think somebody nearly closed it and somebody was like, no, this shall become an odyssey. And it's very, very good. It is a very, there's a very good write-up. I strongly recommend it. I really, really do. Okay. So, onto our third speaker. Let us have our third speaker. Our third speaker this evening is Alex Pounds, and he will be talking about Let Me At My Data, pulling pictures out of an undocumented file format. Alex is a web developer and photographer who lives in Toronto, Canada. He's particularly interested in social software and human-centered product design. When not coding for work, he likes to code for fun, practice piano, and get out into nature. You can find out more about him at alexpounds.com. On Twitter, he is @acreature. And I was about to say something, and I've just lost my train of thought. Alex will be telling us about RTS games. Another subject for which I really hold a soft spot as somebody who grew up playing Age of Empires and subsequently Command and Conquer Red Alert. And so I'm very excited to have this moment of nostalgia of RTSs reappearing in my life again. I'm so excited about this. That's right. That's what I meant to say. If you are just joining us, please tweet about Bang Bang Con and the wonderful things that our speakers are telling you about. But when you do, please tweet with #VirtualBangBangCon or mention us at Bang Bang Con. Anyway, without further ado, Alex Pounds.
Hello, I'm Alex, I'm a web developer, and today I'm going to tell you all about my first ever attempt at reverse engineering a data file. If you've ever played a real-time strategy game, you'll be familiar with the concept of fog of war. You can't see the map until your units explore it. There's an app called Fog of World that brings this concept into real life. When you install it, the world is covered in fog, and as you move around, the fog is cleared away. I installed it on a whim years ago, but it's really changed my relationship with geography. For instance, it inspires me to take new routes around town, and it's particularly cool when traveling. Here's a trip I took to Quebec City a few years ago. This is my own custom map of the city, and it's detailed enough to show individual streets and parks that we visited. But the app can only export screenshots like these. I wanted access to the data so I could draw my own maps. Although there's no official data export, Fog of World syncs with iCloud and Dropbox. If you look in the sync directory, you'll see a whole bunch of files of varying sizes. And they don't have file extensions, so I had to figure out their contents another way. There's a utility called File that can detect file types, and that identified them as compressed files. After I decompressed them, I ran File again, and File did not recognize them. Now, another useful utility for identifying files is Strings, which looks for human-readable text in data, but that didn't find anything either, so my last resort was to look at the raw data. Let's open the file in Hexdump. Hexdump shows three things. It shows an offset into the file, it shows the data itself in bytes, and a human-readable printout if you interpreted those bytes as ASCII text. Now this is the start of the file. What do you notice? I noticed it's mostly empty, and the stars on the left mean everything between the above and below offsets is the same, so it's even emptier than it looks. If I highlight the non-zero bytes, the data seems to form a line. Now this is the top of the file. Let's look at the bottom. The end of the files look different. They're much less sparse, and the data starts to reach the printable ASCII range, and it also falls along straight lines. Now, I didn't notice these lines in Hexdump because they only stand out when you show 0 bytes differently. But I did know the files were mostly empty, and I wanted to look for patterns, so I wrote some code to print out ASCII diagrams, and I made the character wrapping point configurable. Wrapping at 32 characters, we don't get much. 64 character wrap looks a bit more promising. Wrapping at 128 looks great, and 256 characters looks a bit weird again. So that wrap point at 128 seems like a good bet. And seeing tracks so early was a really encouraging start. But this is just the top of the file. What does the rest of the file look like wrapped at 128 characters? Not great. Not great at all. And this stumped me for a while, because there was clearly a pattern. There's this diagonal line which runs through the data, and the data itself is too regular to be random. Beyond 128 characters per line, it's easier to see this data as an image. Let's discard the initial track at the top of the file and see the rest wrapped at 128 characters. I've rotated it 90 degrees to fit more on the slide. And the diagonal lines are even more apparent, and they suggest we're wrapping at the wrong point. I discovered my diagonals changed direction between 257 and 258 characters, and I thought for a while the data was tick-tocking back and forth between 257 and 258, as that did align better. But a clever friend suggested that maybe it was really wrapping at 515 characters, 257 plus 258. And that looks a lot better. This solid black line at the bottom is our former diagonal, and finding this alignment was also really encouraging. But I still didn't know what the data was. I thought, must be location metadata of some kind. But the theory didn't feel quite right. So I had theories but no insights, and I pondered the facts for a day or so. Let's review the clues. First up, something was weird about all the tracks I'd found. Here's them all in one image. Now these are definitely tracks, but they're not very detailed. The app lets us see individual streets, and that's not visible here. Next, let's have another look at the start of the file in Hexdump. This is the track data, but why store it as numbers? The app doesn't need to know about track ordering. And lastly, the ratio of tracks to metadata seemed off. Here's the non-zero bytes of our file again, but with the track included this time. Now, Fog of World is about tracks, and pretty much only tracks. And yet, this was my theory about the file layout. But what if my theory is exactly backwards? What if what I thought were tracks are metadata, and what I thought was metadata was really tracks. Now, this idea came to me one day at work, and I was really excited to go home and try it out. I already had some throwaway code that just kind of poked at the data files. It would read the data and try things like divide the file size by common divisors and count the most frequently occurring values. And my new guess was each number in the top track referred to a 515-byte chunk below. And this held true for all the files. I called this initial track an overmap. Each chunk was 515 bytes, or 512 bytes with 3 left over. 512 bytes is enough for a 64 by 64 pixel square, where each pixel is either on or off. And on or off is all Fog of World cares about. Now, I already had code to draw the overmaps, so it wasn't much work to try this out, and it was extremely satisfying when it worked. The file we've looked at so far is really boring visually, so let's look at a more intricate one. First, let's see one of the 64 by 64 pixel subtiles. I've shown several pixely images at various scales so far, so it's not obvious how small this image is. It's only 2 Super Marios tall, or 4/5 of a Street Fighter. And the subtiles only work when assembled into a bigger map. Here's the overmap for the whole tile, and there's not much detail visible. If we draw each subtile into its overmap location, there's a lot more detail, and this is a low-res preview. Zooming in further, I can show you the subtiles, and this is as granular as it gets. There's the subtile we saw before in context. Now, you might remember that our data chunks are 515 bytes each, but each subtile is made from 512 bytes of pixels. What's the story with the last 3 bytes? Well, I don't know entirely, but I figured out one of them. Let's look at a small part of a different tile, but with the mystery 3 bytes printed as numbers. Almost all the subtiles have the same first mystery byte, not just in this crop, but the entire file, except for one subtile on the right. Now, this track's from Niagara Falls, and I've only ever visited the Canadian side of the falls, but that rightmost subtile that I've barely visited is mostly America, so it seemed like it was related to countries. I pulled the country bytes from all the files into a list and sorted them, and then identified some of those countries because I know where I've been. And it seems a safe bet these are positions in an alphabetized list of ISO 3166 country codes. Now, the other 2 bytes are different, and they don't seem tied to the underlying geography. I have some older backups from Fog of World, so I can compare an older tile with a newer version. And the last 2 bytes change when the pixel data changes, but I don't know more than that yet. Regardless, the bytes don't seem related to drawing maps. Let's return to the file naming. I can render each tile, and I can piece the tiles together by eye. I figure the tile names must be related to its real-world location. And I wrote some code to help me assemble these tiles into a bigger quilt. Here's a chunk of Canada as code, and here's the output. Now, there are definite patterns here. The first 4 characters seem to be a hexadecimal ID, and then the next 4 characters are mostly stable by row, which would suggest the last characters are to do with vertical position, but they have more differences. And some places have longer tile names too. So there's really 2 problems here. Is there a tile for this real-world location, and does this tile have any neighbors? And I haven't solved either, but I am looking for patterns. Here's an example. Let's see all the file names again, but with some duplicate files removed. Different character positions in the file names have different possibilities. The first 4 are clearly hexadecimal, and the next character has only 4 possibilities, which should make you think of a layout scheme like this, or like this, or like this. Unfortunately, my tiles are laid out like this. But in practice, this hasn't been a problem. Sorting tiles by country, combined with the mostly stable row identifier, makes it straightforward to assemble these quilts by hand. And I can now make big maps. Toronto to Ottawa is about 220 miles, or 350 kilometers, so each of these tiles is about 30 miles square, or 50 kilometers square. Now, I've made enough progress to give a talk about this, and I can draw my own maps now, but there are still some open questions. I don't know the meaning of the file naming, or how each file is pinned to the real world, and I also have those 2 bytes for each subtile that are still a mystery. Now, maybe you figured it out already, but if you have, please don't tell me. The Fog of World author seems nice and has some unrelated code on GitHub, so I could probably have just emailed them and asked. But I like puzzles and I want to solve it on my own. Now, this was my first reverse engineering project, so my tips are rudimentary, but it was really fun. So if you like puzzles and you have some mystery data, I definitely recommend trying to figure it out for yourself. One thing that struck me is the power of visualizing data. People often think visualization means charts, but ASCII pictures were enough to confirm I was on the right track. Drawing red squares and numbers on my maps also helped, a graphical equivalent of console.log debugging. And similarly, summarizing data also helped me find patterns and differences. Keeping scratch notes with a stream of consciousness speculation was really useful, especially when I returned to the project after a break. And lastly, even if you're a programmer, don't forget you have other tools too. I used a spreadsheet for some parts of this, and that was a lot quicker. And that's everything. If you have questions or want more details, I'm hanging out in the Bang Bang Con Discord server. Enjoy the rest of your Bang Bang Con.
Ah, that's so cool. Oh man, I love reverse engineering. I love the thing that stuck out in my mind this time. I don't know, but I figured out one of the bytes. This is like the process of discovery, the process of like of going through and figuring out a binary file. Sarah, you were watching on Discord, right? Like, oh, you're muted.
Oh, hi, I'm
Almost.
muted. It has to happen at least once this conference.
Mhm.
I was gonna say, yeah, I have been watching Discord. I've loved everyone's like, wow, that's so cool. Oh, that's awesome. That's great. And then when they figured out like it was a 515 ratio file, like, oh, I hate this. Oh, I'm so angry. No. Oh man, I'm furious. And then they would row back to like, oh, this is so awesome. I love that they're doing. Oh no, this is terrible. This talk has like everything in it.
It's a real roller coaster. I love that. I love that variant. I like that variety of story, which really does turn into quite a roller coaster. I think like that's the reality of picking through binaries.
This is my favorite style of talk nowadays. It's not just technical dives into anything anymore. It's very much I was doing a thing and it worked great and it failed and it worked great and it failed and it worked. I just love it.
Yeah, the trip report genre of talk I always quite like. I did get a chance to flip through Twitter while I was while I was watching, and somebody mentioned they're watching Bang Bang or Bite Size Bang Bang Con 1 hour every night. That's correct. Someone has a messier room than mine. That is correct. Welcome to the Mountain View studio, coming to you live from the Mountain View Hardware Labs. You can see a collection of hardware over there, multimeters and oscilloscope boxes that for some really quite nice rental equipment that's got to go home eventually, and so that box is just going to stay there until that oscilloscope goes home. Welcome to the Mountain View lab. Hello.
See, the secret is hiding your mess around the edges so your camera doesn't pick it up.
That's right. I think I choose to embrace my mess. I think
that's fine.
The mess is really a reflection of my mind also. And that's just kind of the reality of how it is.
Yeah. We're starting to run low on time, so we should probably move on to our fourth speaker.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. So our fourth speaker is Rocky Kev. He is a web developer, game developer, organizer, and teacher. He's an introvert and also enjoys eating waffles and rock climbing, both solo sports. He likes to be in the forefront of web technology and is endlessly fascinated by the ever-changing web landscape. So Rocky Kev is going to tell us about NetMonster, a trip through the early 2000 internet and monsters hidden inside websites. And I think that is another one of my favorite Bang Bang Con genres, is a trip through history in a way that you can only find by doing this kind of deep dive into why something was the way it was and how it is now and how it got there. And so I'm very excited to have Rocky Kev tell us about that. Rocky.
Hi, I'm Rocky. In this talk, we'll be covering NetMonster, a game that no longer exists. I'll show you some NetMonster fan sites from the early 2000s internet, and as a heads up, this will be a very visual talk. I've embedded websites directly into these slides, and I won't necessarily read the content out loud, but hopefully you can read all the funny bits yourself and can always get the slides later. So let's jump right into it. Hi, I'm Rocky. In this talk, we'll be covering NetMonster, a game that no longer exists. I'll show you some NetMonster fan sites from the early 2000s internet, and this talk is a very visual talk. I've embedded websites directly into these slides, and I won't necessarily read the content out loud. But hopefully this video is very detailed, and you can kind of read all the funny bits on your own, or at least get the slides later. So let's jump right into it. And now, this is classic pre-web 2.0 internet. So for anyone out of the loop, this is a professionally built site for the cult classic film Space Jam. This site is real. It still exists and it has valid web code. And again, very classic internet. It has excellent design taste. It has animation. It has blue text on green background, not to mention a table layout. And we have a banner up here. And I want to emphasize this was done by professionals. Now, the sites that were built by novices weren't exactly different. This is also a real website found in the Wayback Machine roughly the year 2000, and still table layouts, some interesting color choices. There's banners and badges, there's a guest book, and there's a web counter, which the service is down, so I made it green so you can see it. What you don't hear is a 2-minute Chrono Trigger audio MIDI file looping in the background. There's even a under construction text because back then you needed to be on the internet now. There was no staging type sites for us. And this is a fan site dedicated to the game NetMonster. We'll come back to this site, but I just wanted to give you the glimpse of early 2000s internet because this can be a culture shock if you're not familiar with yellow text on noisy backgrounds. And so let's just kind of get that out of our system. And let's talk about NetMonster. This game existed from roughly 1999 to 2001-ish. And the thing I want to point out is this guy here. This is a NetMonster badge because hidden on this webpage is a collectible monster. The monsters came in all sorts of weird shapes and sizes. The tagline for the game was Internet Monster Hunting at its finest. Now, NetMonster was a free downloadable game from the late 90s where you collect monsters from URLs. For NetMonster, it was a very Pokemon-esque-ness with the collecting, and how it worked was the player would grab a URL with a NetMonster badge, the player would enter it into the game. Based on the code snippet, the game client would generate a monster, so one URL equals one monster, and you needed strong monsters to defeat the bad guys. The game stopped at version 1.4 because a hard drive crash erased the source code, and there was never a NetMonster version 2. And here's a crazy fact. This game has been abandoned for more than 15 years, and you can still run the NetMonster client today. It was written in .NET and works on Windows 10 machines. It's an absolute tech marvel. So today, we visit the same websites like Facebook and Reddit and Wikipedia, and in the early 2000s, when we called it the information superhighway, there was no Wikipedia. But there was a lot of people who had to share their knowledge, so they built websites, and often for free. So there was an industry of free website builders like GeoCities or Tripod or a dozen other free web services. And to find these knowledge sites was still a challenge. Google was still being figured out in 2000. Like searching did exist, but I mean, good luck. And much of the internet was organized in topics in what we called web rings. People made websites based on a specific topic and they joined a web ring. And really, very often we just created shrines for our internet anime waifus. And you'd put your website on the web ring and now people can find it. And going back to NetMonsters, there were NetMonster websites because to catch NetMonsters, you needed to find websites with the NetMonster badge, which means visiting NetMonster web rings, which means being familiar with fan sites about NetMonster. And this is where we hit this sad point because that is a lie. The internet isn't forever. This was an obscure game in 2000. These fan sites are dead. You can't Google NetMonsters and find anything about the game. I went to page 50 in the search results. It's not there. These fan sites are gone from the modern web. Heck, GeoCities doesn't even exist anymore. So I dug into the backups of data hoarders through GeoCity torrents and through the Wayback Machine in order to find these fan sites that no longer exist in the modern internet, which brings me back to Kragok's NetMonster Reality fan site. So Kragok, what is your site about? I've included the metadata because I just thought it was hilarious. So on the left side, it's hard to see. There's an FAQ. Kragok provides links to catch monsters. But if we scroll down, I love this fan art, and you can kind of guesstimate Kragok's age. And this text is hilarious. And over here is that Netmonster web ring list. The links to catch net monsters, they're not all pages full of content. Many of these fan sites had pages upon pages of empty HTML files with a single button and sometimes a banner. Like this was an actual web page. So let's move on. So this is Comics Castle. His banner alt text is kind of interesting, but if we scroll down, he has a bunch of really sweet material for that net monster visitor. There's even comics, which unfortunately leads to broken images. I want to show this random story off, April 1st, 2001, where he says, Netmonster sucks. Why do I even have this page up anymore? I'm erasing this page tomorrow, and I just uploaded a virus to your computer for even daring to play Netmonster. Then you read the next line, April Fool! Ah, you joker. Let's keep trucking along. This is Darcy's Net Monsters. Let's ignore the H1 for a bit and scroll to the goods. And it's really cute. This line, dogs, wolf, take us home. Oh, Darcy. Darcy was a helpful member of the Net Monster community. Darcy even organized the monsters into these categories for us. Thanks, Darcy. But heading back to that H1, Netmonster works on a freemium model. To unlock everything, you had to spend $25 or refer a bunch of people to buy it. So Darcy is saying over here, refer me, get me a premium license, and I will give you secrets. Darcy was an entrepreneur. So we hit some fun sites, but here's some of the sadness. Not every site was intact. Like Powerpuff CA, look at the right side and all those 404 errors pointing to images. What was here? We would never know. Then we have Dux's site. Dux had a Netmonster choose your own adventure. And he had a quiz. None of the links worked, and I looked. So that was kind of sad. So let's kind of get real depressing and wrap up with Chris's Net Monsters. So around the early 2000s, Chris hosted his Netmonster site on a free hosting platform called VR9. And somewhere between fall and winter of 2000, Chris revamped his site to be more of a table design. You could really start to see his hobby peak on this page, where he has over 2,400 net monsters in his collection. And I just love on the side where he shows off his computer specs. But something fascinating happened in the year 2000, which was the dot-com bubble burst, and that free host was affected. And what I know is that by 2005, that URL pointed to this site on the right. Now, this isn't an end to Chris's story, because maybe Chris knew about living on free web hosts, because Chris migrated as much as he could to a new free hosting server. And a lot of the design is still there. He even calls his account NetMonster, but something is missing, which is a lot of the details. But in 2003, just 1 year after the migration, something else major happened. This time, it wasn't involving any dot-com bursts or bubbles. In 2003, Chris changed. He revamped his website. The URL is still the same. It still has a NetMonster URL, but now it's a blog about Latin. And there's no reference to NetMonster. It's sad, like real Toy Story 3 sad. There's a lot of sites I didn't even cover, but we can start to piece together this universe, and it's kind of pointing at all of these missing pieces. And here's the thing. I don't even like Netmonster. It was an awful game. And that's what makes me sad, because I had a random thought about a random web game that I played for like 2 days in 1999. And you can't deny that there's a real history that the modern internet has nothing about. The internet is incredibly fragile, and if it wasn't for the Wayback Machine, it would have been lost forever.
All right. Yeah. I keep coming back to this idea of everything old is new again. And I think I did tab over to Discord briefly, and I saw somebody mention, I miss this internet so much. And there's a lot about that generation of the internet that I don't really miss. But the the way in which publishing was this decentralized thing in which you could typing in and using all of the interesting features of HTML 1.0 and not having to worry terribly about the form of it, but just knowing that you could type in a whole bunch of H2s with dates on there, and that would be your blog. I miss that. I do miss that. But yes.
Yeah, there was a certain freedom to just kind of be really creative with old websites. And now it's, there's a bit of creativity, but it's a lot of best practices and ways to influence your audience, and just didn't really have that 20 years ago.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think there's maybe the question to leave ourselves with at the end of the day is like, this is the thing that's going to be ticking over in my head for the rest of the evening, is what was exciting about that generation of internet that I miss? And like, why can't we have, like, is it intrinsic that we cannot have nice things? No, I don't believe that. I think we can have nice things. That would be good. And that generation of internet, like that freedom seemed like kind of a nice thing. Anyway, it is 6:01 p.m. my time, and that means that it is time to let you all go. Coming up next is the hallway track, which is in Skittish. And we will also I think we are also experimentally using Skittish for a place to sync watch also, if you prefer to watch there. So you can sync watch on the live stream page, or you can sync watch inside of Skittish.
And after the sync watch, be sure to go in to people. There's another hallway track after the sync watches, so you can go and chat with people there too.
Oh, all right. That's cool. Cool. Anyway, so yes. So coming up next, no matter when you are watching this, as long as it's during one of the officially authorized times to watch this, it is the hallway track. I wanted to thank all of our speakers this evening. Once again, I wanted to thank Quinn Dombrowski, Nicholas Carlini, Alex Pounds, and you just heard from Rocky Kev. And I'd like to thank all of our sponsors again: Accelerated Tech, Mapbox, Phase Zero, 2 Sigma, Full Story, Discourse, Wherewithal, Daily, and Xander. Say when the live stream happens. When does I think you might have all the time zones. Can you say all the time zones, please?
I didn't have all the time zones.
Oh, no.
Yesterday very well, and I don't. I believe it's 8 p.m. for the live session in Eastern time. That would be 6 o'clock your time, I think? Or no,
5 p.m. my time, 5 p.m. Pacific.
I have this on a chart somewhere. We know what we're doing.
Yeah, right. Welcome to Bang Bang Con. We're the experts. Okay. 8 p.m. Eastern, session. 5 p.m. Pacific, 1 a.m. UTC. And of course, the Sync Watch is tomorrow morning if you missed any of these talks. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. We will see you tomorrow night.
Yep. Bye.
Bye-bye.